Today's guest is Michael Kummer. Michael is a blogger and a podcaster, and he's developed his own line of supplements. Yet another way to go to business in the health and wellness world. And Michael tells us exactly how he made it really work for him. Just in case you wondered if there was a way to build a successful health business without grinding on Instagram every day, there is. And Michael shows us how. Please enjoy. Hi, I'm Erin Power.
And I'm Laura Rupsis.
We're certified health coaches, and this is Health Coach Radio.
This podcast is about the art, science, and business of health coaching.
We share our insider tips to help you become a better coach and entrepreneur.
And we interview expert guests to discover how they've made it in this growing field.
It's time for health coaches to make an impact.
It's time for Health Coach Radio. All right, Michael Kummer, how are you? Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Well, Erin and I had the blessing of being in your podcast not too long ago. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but and we really wanted to have you on ours because there's so much that you talk about that is super aligned with Primal for sure. But this podcast is for health coaches broadly, and there's a lot about what you do that is right in the wheelhouse too, that I know a lot of health coaches would love to hear how you built. So with that as a backdrop, will you please share, just tell everybody, just introduce yourself and kind of what you're doing now, but most importantly, what brought you here? Like, what's your origin story?
Yeah. So I was born and raised for the most part in Austria. Standard middle-class type of family. Discovered track and field in my late teens. Unfortunately, I wasn't the most talented athlete. I couldn't even run straight. But my coach had faith, I guess. And so I stuck with it. And I actually ended up being the fifth fastest 100-meter sprinter in Europe in 2001, I think it was. And also became the youngest Austrian 100-meter champion in the Second Republic, which I don't know, that means a lot. But I guess I turned out better than most people would have thought in the beginning. And I was very much focused on fitness, not so much on health and fitness, mostly on fitness. In fact, I didn't really appreciate the impact nutrition and sleep has on performance and on my well-being or health for that matter. And so I did a lot of things that were definitely not conducive to optimal performance. And I wish I had known what I know now. But anyway, at some point, I realized that unfortunately, being a track and field athlete in Austria doesn't make any money unless you're a soccer player or a skier. There is no money to be made. And so I followed my second passion, and it was technology at the time. And so I started my own business and failed miserably. Moved to Switzerland because I got an opportunity to work for an IT security company in Switzerland. And from there I came to the US and, made a career in IT security. And along the way, I realized, by looking into the mirror occasionally, that my physique had dramatically changed, unfortunately not for the better. After I adopted the standard American diet, which is arguably worse than the standard European diet. And so along the way, I've been suffering with irritable bowel syndrome for most of my life. My dad had it. His dad died of colon cancer before he turned 50. So gut issues, I guess, ran in the family, or so I thought. And, at some point, I think we watched a documentary on Netflix that was about the amount of added sugars the average American consumes a year. And my wife and I at that point said, this is absolutely ridiculous and we have to cut out added sugars. And that's really where our health journey began. And that was, I think, also the very seed of what later spawned into my supplements business, the blog, all the content production that I do. As well as the podcast. And so that's how it started, by removing added sugars from our diet. From that, we rolled into a paleo diet. From there, we went into keto, carnivore, animal-based. Never really dabbled a lot with plant-based diets, with the exception that at one point, my wife and I'm embarrassed to admit it, considered meatless Mondays. Now we have plant-based almost every day, but we did it for a while too. And yeah, so, along the lines, I actually started blogging in 2012, and it wasn't really a business or even I didn't even have spent a second on, but thinking of how this could turn into a business. It was just a passion project of sharing what I've learned, so I don't have to tell everyone the same story, and people can just read it. And it was mostly focused on tech and photography in the beginning, but as my passion for health and fitness and longevity and biohacking grew, I started shifting more towards those topics. And at some point, it turned out that a lot of people found my stuff on Google, and I started making some money with affiliate commissions and ads and stuff. And a couple of years later, I made more money doing blogging than my day job brought. And so I'm like, well, maybe it's now time to, to shift gears and focus more on the things that I'm really passionate about, and that I've seen can help people improve their health and well-being or athletic performance. And so I started taking this more seriously, quit my day job at some point. And one day my wife said, you know what, you don't really want to rely on Google, because 90-something% of all my blog visitors found my blog via Google. And so, Google changes their algorithm every day. And, maybe one day, all the traffic is gone and there's nothing I could do about it beyond, those people who I had on my mailing list. And so my wife suggested to come up with a physical product. And so I'm like, well, as part of my blogging, I've tested and used and tried so many different supplements and gadgets and whatnot. But I was like, but most of them I don't use anymore. It's like a temporary thing, that you do something for a while and then you do something else. And so I figured, or we thought about what would be that one thing, one product that we can see ourselves using and recommending and selling, because I don't want to sell something that I don't personally use, for the foreseeable future, ideally for the rest of our lives. That we concluded that, well, beef organs are one of those things that I believe humans should be consuming as part of their regular diet. And so I also understand that most people don't care much for their taste and texture of organ meats, unfortunately, at least not anymore. Our grandparents were probably different. And so, freeze-dried beef organ supplements made a lot of sense. And that's what we started. That was 2 years ago. And then just a couple of months ago, actually, I also launched a podcast, because I realized not everyone wants to read, long form articles. Some people just want to listen to stuff, or just want to get, there are a lot of people these days that fortunately, trust what I have to say, and they just want to hear what I have to do and not get into all the science and nitty gritty and stuff behind that. And so I'm like, the podcast would be an ideal platform to just, share that information in 20-minute, 30-minute episodes. And, if you want to read more, learn more, go to the blog. There's usually an article that backs up what I say in the podcast. And yeah, from there, the business is growing. And now we also have another side business that kind of, I think, goes very much in line with the whole idea of living better, living healthier, and going back more to our, I guess, primal roots, right? And that is homesteading, so raising, animals for food instead of relying on, the grocery store, basically, and not understanding where food really comes from. And so we raise chickens, we raise rabbits, we have honeybees, we have geese. We just bought some more land to raise dairy cows and cattle, so we can really do the regenerative, rotational grazing and all of the things that, you hear about. And, you want to buy products that are regeneratively raised, but no, I actually want to eat products that I regeneratively, raise. And so that's going to be the next piece of the puzzle, I guess.
Oh, I just got very excited. About that last bit. But let's go in order here. So blogging. I want to talk about blogging. You started blogging in 2012, kind of a heyday of blogging. And you monetized your blog. So we have affiliate links, but also ads on your blog. And I literally want to get into the mechanics of this a little bit, if you're cool with that, just because I mean, like, to this day, 2023, almost 2024, is your blog still pulling in money? Like, it's still pulling in your...
It's the primary income driver still. Yeah, and that is, with the supplements, the revenue is higher, but there is a cost of goods sold, right? I have to pay for, the product before I can sell it. With blogging, I invest time, and that's usually, one time for an article. It's not, it's not entirely true, because, I keep updating the articles, as there is new information, etc. but for the sake of simplicity, I publish something, be it a review of a sauna or of whatever the case might be, and that article then produces income for months and in some cases even years. So it's not truly passive income, but it's more passive than only trading time for money, let's say. So if you're a health coach, let's say, or an inspiring health coach, there is only so many hours in your day that you can trade for money, right? And by implementing some of those digital content, for that matter, be it workshops or master classes or blog posts, whatever the case might be, you can generate significant income and have a steady stream of income that might carry you, if maybe, an important client drops, or if you have trouble, finding new clients, maybe because there is another, pandemic and people are, not want to spend money, whatever the case might be, So I think it's important consideration for anyone who is in the business of trading time for money to have something else that can produce income while you're sleeping, so to say.
Yeah, right. So, gosh, this is so interesting because, well, first of all, it's easy to romanticize this a little. I don't want to do that. Like, oh man, you write a review on a sauna and then it just generates income. I mean, there is work here because you're writing the piece. Well, you have to, use the sauna, review it, write the piece. You're like, to your point, you're constantly updating. So old blog posts have to be kind of resurrected and improved as time goes on. This seems like actually a lot to keep track of. I kind of want to ask, like, how much time do you spend on your blog per week? I want to ask that question. I also want to ask, like, what kinds of advertisers are advertising on your blog? Do you have control over that, or is it just whatever gets served up? So let's go through those mechanics.
Great question. So on an average week, my writing days are Tuesday and Wednesday. So that means, half day Tuesday, half day Wednesday, I produce content for the blog, and then I have an editor, who straightens out my English, makes it American English, and then we go back and forth a little bit. But I want to say, and the thing really not, when I started blogging, the mainstream advice was, well, you have to publish every day, much like on social media, you have to publish every day. The truth is, publishing frequency might be a factor, depending on, again, it really depends on how you intend on driving traffic to your blog. For me, it's mostly organic traffic, meaning that I write so that people can, when they search for certain terms, they find it on Google and then they come to my page, And for that, if you publish once a week or once every 2 weeks, it's the same as if you publish every day. Of course, the more content, the more good and high quality content you have, the more people you might attract if assuming all of those pieces of content rank. And that's really the critical part. That's really the biggest challenge, I think, for a newbie, because Google assigns what's known as site authority or even page authority. So if you have never written a blog post, you buy your domain, you install WordPress, and you put out your first blog post. In the eyes of Google, you're a nobody. Why should Google trust you? Why should Google rank your article and not, the hundreds of articles that are already out there? So there are a couple of nuances to that. One is, what is the difficulty of the search term you're after? If you want to write about how to improve your health, you will never ever be able to rank, for that search term, because there is WebMDs, there is Healthline, there are all of those big outlets that may or may not have good content. Most of it is not good, but Google thinks there is an authority, they have authority. And so they rank them first. But if you're in a certain niche and you want to write about, how to fix, electrolyte balance on a carnivore diet, let's say, it's a fairly long search term, then even if you're a new site, you have a very good chance of ranking if Google thinks you can answer the search intent, or you can satisfy the search intent, so that people, when they read your piece, they don't have to go back and look for something else. I mean, there is a lot of technicality to it, but the bottom line really is, if you produce high quality content that's better of what's out there, and if you're able to satisfy the search intent, then you have a very good chance of ranking and of getting people to your content and making money with it, because only if people, read that stuff, they can click on a link where you earn commission, or they can see an ad where you earn commission. So that's really more important than how much time you spend on producing content. It's more about whatever you put out needs to be the best that's out there, and it has to fulfill the search intent, you know?
Cool. So when you're writing, do you just understand Google and SEO enough so that when you're writing, you can make sure to check all these boxes, or does your editor help with that? And do you use tools like, what's that tool called? Answer the Public? Do you ever use that tool where it's, do you ever use that tool to figure out what people are even Googling? And then are you kind of gaming the system a little bit, or not? Because when I think about this stuff, I think, oh, I can't even write the way I want to write. I have to write the way Google wants me to write, and it feels like a bummer to me. But how do you
Yeah.
bridge that?
Yeah, the thing is, in the past, there was a lot of gaming involved. I never engaged in that because it is very short-lived. Whatever you think you can game, it might work for a couple of weeks, and then Google, releases an update to kind of remove that spam, and then you're out, and you might not come back if you get blacklisted. So gaming or trying to game it is not really the idea. And Google is also very specific about saying, don't write for us, write for the user. Make sure that whatever you put out, meets search intent, satisfies search intent, and helps the user, provides good user experience. And if you do that, then that's really all it matters. Yeah, there are some technicalities. Obviously, you want to be sure you have, you mentioned certain keywords in certain areas, like your title needs to be related to the content what you're writing about. You cannot have like a clickbait kind of title of your post, and then the post itself is something completely different. There are certain technical aspects to SEO, but there's also a lot of, I guess, art to it, where nobody truly understands exactly how Google works. Google is fairly transparent, and if you follow Google's guidelines over time, I think you will do well. And trying to game the system is not going to work. But to answer your question, yes, I have a relatively good idea of what it takes, and my editor has an even better idea of what it takes, because he keeps on top of the whatever Google puts out in terms of advice and guidelines and et cetera, to make sure we don't do certain things that Google does not like. But most of the things that Google does not like, or that Google likes, is very much in the interest of the end user. And so if you write for the end user, then and make it readable. There are some people who just like to write very long articles without subheadings, without bullet points, making it hard to read. Those kind of things Google doesn't like, and the end user doesn't like either. So again, it goes back to write it in a way that makes it easy to consume the content, to get the gist of what you're trying to say, and to satisfy the search intent. If I'm looking for what's the best electrolyte on a ketogenic diet, and I talk about where salt comes from and those kind of things, nobody cares. I mean, people might care, but it doesn't really satisfy the search intent. And so stick to the search, try to address the search query, and you'll, chances are you'll do fairly well. In terms of ad revenue, most of my ad revenue is coming from affiliate. So brands that I have an affiliate relationship with, where I get a discount code or a link. And if people use that code or use the link, they usually get a discount, and I get a commission. And I'm obviously transparent about that. I say that, hey, this article contains affiliated link. That's also one thing important for Google as well as for the end user. Nobody wants to get tricked. So being transparent about that. And then there are some programmatic ads that get shown where I don't have control over what is shown. It's really based on what the algorithm thinks you want to see, right? You as the end user.
So I just want people listening, everything you're talking about, Michael, is everything we hammer on in our business training in our school. Everything you just said about being very specific, that the more sort of niche-y or specialized your niches and what you're talking about, the more it's going to open the doors for the client that you're looking to serve. This comes up every single time. Where am I going to find clients? We keep trying to say, no one's buying health coaching. Don't write about that, right? You've got to write about the problem that you solve as a coach, and then going through is sort of in rank order and importance and words, all this other stuff, in terms of making sure that what you're putting out there is going to be findable by your end reader, which is exactly what you're talking about, right? Everything you're describing is what we mean by being findable. But first, you got to get really, really clear on, your messaging, really, really clear on who you are, who you serve, the problems they solve, and all of the topics that are going to be uniquely important to that end audience. So we did not tee him up, folks. We didn't tell him that this is exactly what we talk about. And thank you for going into even more detail in terms of sort of what should go into what you're writing and how to not game the system so much as use the system to your advantage, right? Because I agree with you there. There's likely some things in the algorithm that Google's driving, but I think at the end of the day, you're right. What they're looking for is a positive and optimal end user experience. And their end users are showing behaviors that are indicating what they want to hear. And so to Erin's point, which she's like, I kind of feel like I have to write about what Google wants. Sometimes that's writing for what your end user thinks they want can be exhausting too. We know that sometimes what they want isn't really what they need.
Right.
But you got to get them to find you, and you got to understand that. So I thank you very much for that. I hope everybody picked up on that. I'm sure Erin did too. Do you mind speaking to a little bit? So you started your blog in 2012. How long did it take you to monetize that? Because I mean, that's how I started my blog. I never monetized it, but it's what eventually led me to health coaching because people kept asking me for help. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, So I eventually got a health coaching certification. So I never really tried to monetize it, but I'm wondering, do you find on average, you kind of need to have a certain volume of like a library, right? A certain volume of content. And do advertisers come to you? Do you seek them out? Do you kind of open your blog for ads and things? But then also yours is also affiliate marketing. That's a bit different.
Yes. So I didn't really keep records exactly of when I started earning money, but it took at least a couple of years to. I actually just looked the other day. It took me 3 years to get 10,000 readers per month. So it certainly didn't happen overnight. At the same time, when I started, I had no idea how to write, what to write about, what search intent was, if people were even looking for it. I just wrote what I thought people want to hear, regardless, of whether or not they really wanted to hear that. And so I would say that if you get the basics right, if you have a good understanding of how to write and what to write about, it shouldn't take you 3 years. But it also doesn't happen overnight because you need to build authority with Google. And one of the things that can help to speed that up is to have other sites link back to you. In particular, if they link back, on certain anchor keywords that you want to rank for and link to particular blog posts, not only to your main site, but really to individual blog posts. Let's say you write about, the ketogenic diet, and people link to, electrolytes on keto and link that back to an article that you wrote about on the subject. That really helps for Google to understand, hey, this site is getting backlinks, so it's got to be important. Other people are linking to it, and that really helps with your exposure, and then to ultimately make money. But in terms of volume, it really depends a little bit on what your affiliate game is. If affiliate revenue is your goal, there are, in reality, only a handful of articles produce most of my income. And so there are particularly ones that are higher price tickets, like an infrared sauna or something like that, costs thousands of dollars. If you only get 10% commission, whatever the commission might be, it's a lot of money. Whereas if you are affiliated with a supplements brand and the supplement costs $50 and you get 10%, it's $5. So the volume comes into the equation. It really depends on what it is, and if it's a higher price ticket, you can get away with less volume. And if it's something that produces less commission, then you need less commission, you need more volumes.
Thank you for that. And a couple of things I want to kind of pull out is this 3-year number. How about it, Erin? Like there's something magic about that third year. It doesn't have to be 3 full years, but there's something magic about your third year where momentum builds. You spend your first year, like you're saying, kind of figuring things out. And you're also, so not only are you figuring out how to write, figuring out how to, like, what your audience is picking up on, but then you're also kind of figuring out what's going to get the most traction as well, and how you can say the same thing like 8 times or whatever the case may be. And then your second year, you're repurposing all of that into perhaps another vehicle or in other ways and giving talks or whatever. And there's something about that third year where all of a sudden you feel as though you're finally being compensated for the work you're putting in there, which is awesome. And by the way, this is not unique to our role. I have started many businesses. I've been in the business world for decades. It's the same. When you're starting off a new territory, when you're selling a new product, when you're brand new to any game, you kind of have to earn some street cred. But I do believe that you're right. I think this can be sped up now just due to the internet. So let's say, for example, somebody lands on an article of yours that perhaps, and they're like, oh, I've never heard of this person before. What is that person going to see beyond that initial article? This is why in the beginning, I'd love your thoughts on this, is maybe how often you're writing important there, though, so you can speed up this like volume of work so that when people do find you, there's a lot behind you.
Yeah, I mean, you probably, if someone finds an article and that's the only article on your site, they might question, what you have to say is useful information. So yes, there is definitely an argument to be made for having a set of articles before you start maybe, spending marketing money on promoting the blog or whatever. Case in point, we recently started blogging for our homestead. And we only have 2 articles for now. There are a couple of more in the pipeline, but I would not, start, sending an email blast, say, hey, we launched a new blog and there are only 2 articles out there. So, you want to have a good volume and really think about, and that goes also back to not only to Google, but I think generally, think about not so much individual topics, but topic clusters, So let's say, nutrition, within nutrition, ketogenic diet is your thing, or a paleo diet, or a vegan diet, whatever the case might be, try to come up with good content that is in the same cluster, because then also Google sees, hey, this person produced a lot of good information in a particular area. So you get cluster authority or topic authority, right, on certain things, instead of writing, about, CrossFit one day and then about the ketogenic diet the other day, and then you do, something completely different, maybe the benefits of sauna bathing. That's all great, but I would rather focus on a cluster first and exhaust that cluster, and have really, a couple of hub pages and supporting pages to have a well-rounded cluster where you can prove your authority, that you covered that topic, that cluster, from a lot of different angles. And if there's someone interested in the ketogenic diet, they find everything from recommended supplements to, how you deal with certain issues like electrolyte imbalance, how to deal with ABC, food sourcing, whatever the case might be. You're the go-to person for the ketogenic diet, or you can be even more specific. But the point really is, don't spread out too much, focus on clusters. That helps you with Google. And I think it also helps you with your clientele, because then people come back to you for those specific topics and you're not trying to chase 5 different markets,
Let me tell you about my friend Carolyn. She's an athlete with a passion for health. She'd been health coaching friends, families, strangers, not even knowing it was a thing. She just felt called to help other people live their healthiest lives. Then she discovered the Primal Health Coach certification program, and she went from feeling like an imposter to belonging to an amazing community of like-minded health pros. Confident and finally able to enjoy a fulfilling and profitable career doing exactly what she loves. Carolyn is one of thousands of certified Primal Health coaches living their best lives and helping their clients do the same. The Primal Health Coach Institute offers a variety of health and fitness certifications and specializations. Our graduates are practicing unique coaching specialties and changing lives in countries all over the world. We're always growing and evolving, so come grow with us. Visit primalhealthcoach.com to check out our courses and offerings. Oh my gosh, that's amazing advice just for, first of all, identifying and establishing yourself as an expert in one area, which is something that I really teach our students to do. In fact, I tell them to start referring to themselves as the world leading expert in whatever. It's just a kind of a thought experiment. But there's so much content to write. If you can zero in on one thing, there's so much content to write. I was talking to one student who, I can't remember what his point of view was, but he's like, well, I like talking about why, eating more protein is important. That's one topic, right? That sounds like that might be one blog post. That could be 50 blog posts. How to get 50 grams of protein at breakfast. How to time your, most bioavailable protein, you could write 50 blog posts on that topic, and you could completely exhaust the category of protein. You could be, and before you move on, that's such a nice way to organize it, because otherwise it's very scattershot. Well, what should I write about now? Maybe I should write about, taking a walk or something. So I think that's just a really good, for somebody getting started, we want them to start making content because it helps establish your authority. But like literally just talk about one thing for a while. That's so easy. I love that. That's really nice advice. Do you know what I was thinking as you were sharing this? Like, gosh, it feels so different than social media content marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like, this is where I feel overwhelmed, because it's like, oh yeah, I write a lot. I write a lot of content. I should just put it all up on my blog and start monetizing it. But it's so different, because social media content it doesn't have to play by Google's rules. It plays by these algorithm rules, which is like, oh, this thing went weirdly viral because it was polarizing, or this thing was because he didn't have a shirt on and people liked that, or whatever. It's so different. Like the way the algorithm rewards you is so shallow, ultimately. So it's not even almost like, I'm thinking through, and this is for anybody else who, like me, had really doubled down on social and did not post back to their blog. That content on social probably isn't going to be great for a blog, really. Correct. You can put it there. You can put it there if you want to keep it there, but it's not necessarily going to establish your authority or rank you in any meaningful way. It really is different content, isn't it?
Yes,
what do you think about that?
It most definitely is, and I like the those two examples that he gave with polarizing and he took his shirt off, because on the homestead, my main goal is with on my main channels, not the homestead is like a side gig that we'd like to grow, but it's not the focus where we put the resources behind. But funny enough, we recently posted a video on how we butchered our rooster because he was getting too aggressive. 5 million views on YouTube.
Oh my gosh.
More views than I've ever had on my main, YouTube channel, period, and because it was controversial, because there were those who, don't agree with killing an animal for whatever reason, and those who understand. So it was, very much polarizing. And you can see it by the content. And then another post we did where I built like a goose house, and it was high summer, it was super hot, and I did not have a shirt on, and people commented more on my triceps than on anything else, and it also, did very well on social. But something like this it's not gonna go well on a nobody cares about that, on Google or in the written side of the equation. So yes, I totally agree. Different things. I mean, repurposing is fine. You can take snippets out of your blog post and make them work on social media. You can, take topics that worked well on social media and write a blog post about it. But just using the content like, oh, I have this already, now I'm just going to publish it here too, is usually a waste of time.
Yeah, that's good. It's so wild. Like, so is your YouTube channel monetized as well for the homestead, or this rooster video? It got 5 million?
No, we actually, before we published the video, I think we had maybe 5,000 subscribers, and I think you need more. I don't know what you need. You need a certain viewer number and, watch hours, et cetera, et cetera. And literally within 2 weeks, we went up to almost 30,000 subscribers because of that video. So a lot of good people now are following us, because I don't think the vegan population, has started to follow us. But at least those who appreciate, raising your own food, and sometimes, that involves, unfortunately, butchering animals. A lot of them did. And so we grew the channel a lot, and we are about on the brink of being able to monetize it. It's not going to be, obviously retroactive for those 5 million views we had on that video. Yeah. But, the next polarizing thing, I guess, we post might help.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, and I just to kind of keep pulling this thread. So I had a video that went quasi-viral, not to that extent, on Instagram, and just by accident. It wasn't even that interesting. I didn't take my shirt off. Anyway, but maybe I should have.
Well, here is an idea for the next one.
But so my engagement went up, my following grew, my call calendar, because I get my money from clients. That's how I earn my health coaching. And my call calendar filled up, but none of them are quality. None of them have converted to clients. Nothing has come of it, Like, that's the thing. When something goes viral, people are waiting for their viral moment. Like, it's not that good. I honestly wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy in some cases. Like, the amount of comments you have to field, but it didn't convert, really. So that's not what we should be waiting on. That's not the hope and the dream we should be waiting on, you know?
Sort of serves a different purpose, right? Social media. And I mean, although Erin, you're an example of someone whose entire business really comes from there, but so there's that. I would love to kind of continue to sort of pull this thread and think through, especially for those that are looking to build an online business and being findable and really understanding where people are finding you. And I would agree with you. I do kind of think the blog's coming back a little bit. I've started to read more emails now, particularly when I can't even tell you how much time it took to clean out my email thing and like unsubscribe from all the stuff that I don't read. And now I have one that of the things that I just want to read that I find really interesting. But so you've got your blog where people are finding you, and you've got affiliate links and some advertisers where you're able to earn ad revenue. You have a YouTube channel, you have your podcast. I would love some insight a little bit on how you might utilize those things to accomplish, the end goal of kind of growing this sort of multifaceted business that you've got.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I've come to realize that I really want to focus on the things that bring me joy, regardless of how much money certain things might or might not make. I don't want this to turn into, another job that at some point I don't want to do anymore because it's repetitive and, includes a lot of things that I don't like. So I really go by the flow, but the way I see it is my blog is a vehicle where I can really go into more details, where I can, express more nuance than I can do on a 20 or 30-minute podcast or even, a YouTube video. My YouTube videos used to be longer, but the truth is that people have a very short attention span these days. And, if it's longer than 10 minutes, most people zone out. And so my goal really is with the blog to give people the information they need quickly, but then also provide all the extra information if someone is curious, if someone really wants to figure out, is this true or what's the science behind, or whatever the case might be. And to make sure that I cover, enough of the content to fulfill ideally one search intent, but maybe that one search intent, is different flavors. People might search for slightly different keywords, but kind of mean the same thing. So I want to make sure I cover all of this in my blog post. The video, YouTube in particular, is more like a supporting act. I don't want to say I've figured out YouTube by any stretch of the imagination. I think my YouTube channel is doing relatively poorly compared to my blog, even though the content is roughly the same. And so there is still a lot of work to be done on YouTube, but I see YouTube for like as a summary, kind of a video summary of my most important content. So if someone wants to watch instead of reading, they can do that. And if they need more information, they can always click through to the blog post and look at that specific study or whatever the case might be. And the podcast is somewhat in between, where I talk about things that I don't think I can realistically rank for, or that are not defined by individual search intent. So it's more like, my thoughts about wearing sunscreen, those kind of things where, ranking is going to be incredibly difficult, even though I just published a blog post on, on why I don't think you need sunscreen for the most part, and what is the issue associated with most sunscreens. But that's a perfect example of a podcast where I can talk about this, not worrying about, if people are going to find it on Google. Mm-hmm. Of course, the question is then, how do people find a podcast? Well, and there is my mailing list and the blog, etc., are vehicles to kind of help drive people towards the podcast, or like we did, you were on my show, I'm on your show now, to kind of spread the word through that mechanism, and not necessarily rely on Google and its algorithm to right, find the podcast. So that's kind of the way I see it. And social media is, I don't really like social media. So I'm not good at it. I don't like it. I'm not a consumer. But I see the opportunity and the possibilities. I just haven't found someone who can do it in a way that doesn't cost too much, because I don't see a return on my investment. As you just said, the quality of clients you get from there is probably not the same. But I do realize a lot of people who follow me on social media just to get information about, okay, when I have a new blog post or a new podcast, or they just read what I have to say and they find it interesting. But it's people don't search for stuff on social media. The algorithm recommends, and you're completely at the mercy of that algorithm of what Instagram or whatever thinks who should see your post. And they probably also realize that I don't like the platform and I don't use it, and so I don't think they would go out of their way to be kind to me.
We as a school, and we're trying to reach our target audience of people, health nuts, or people that have discovered this and have become evangelical about it and realize that they really want to be able to pay it forward and help others. And, oh, by the way, there's like a whole career. So this is our target audience. And we rely predominantly on social media ads, and they're super fickle. We get a lot of leads, but the quality of that lead changes all the time. And so it sounds to me like if somebody happens to be on social media and they are searching for or clicking on things that might be similar to something you put out, you're going to be fed to them, but it's going to be a snippet. It's really more about, hey, this guy's out here. If I want to know more about him, here's the link to my blog, or here's the link to my podcast, where you allow yourself to shine there, where people can really get to know you, and where people can hear your voice and decide whether they think you're legit. And, oh my gosh, this guy, now I trust him, and this infrared sauna and these supplements. So I kind of feel like they all have their own purpose, but holy cow, juggling all this stuff has got to be mind-boggling until it sounds to me like you've developed a little bit of a system. Like, do you have a system? Do you start with your blog in mind and then think, okay, here's my blog. This is useful for perhaps YouTube. This might be useful for the podcast. Do you?
Yeah, I have a system where, that includes pretty much everything except, social media. It's very sporadic for me. But I do have it's an ever evolving system. It's not something static that I follow and, this is it. But every so often, I get together with my editor and we say, okay, what is it that we want to, do we need to spend more time on improving existing articles? Because that's always easier than writing new stuff. And he is very good at keeping an eye on, where, we drop in traffic or, revenue or whatever. And we try to, see what's going on and, improve that and spend an hour improving rather than, 8 hours writing something new. And then think about, okay, what are some of the topic clusters we want to focus on? What are maybe some of the existing clusters that can, that would benefit from more content to make it more robust and to make our authority in that area even better? And then YouTube, typically what I try is most everything that I put out on the blog, I try to also record at least a short YouTube video so we can embed it, so you can get views from there. You can catch the people who, start reading, but then are like, you know what, I'd rather, watch the video real quick instead of reading the entire thing. And then on social media, again, there is not really, I think starting next year, my brother-in-law, actually my wife's brother, will start working for us full time. So and he's very good with social media and video editing and stuff. So he'll probably keep an eye on that to see, okay, what can we leverage for social media, and not so much for the purpose of creating or generating revenue or finding a new audience, but very often when someone hears your name or maybe they read something, they go into social media, so who is this guy? It might be vice versa, but very often, they check out your social media and see what you're up to. And if you're not on social media, or if your last post was a year ago, that doesn't leave a good impression. And so you gotta do it. You gotta, have it's like a business card, as far as I'm concerned, for me, where, there is good content there, is quality content there, it's somewhat up to date. But I don't necessarily expect to be making a lot of money from social media.
That's a really good way of looking at it. Gosh, like thinking through how you kind of orchestrate your content calendar, or whatever we're going to call it. Like, the thing about a content calendar is and I'm going to make this comparison again, a content calendar for social media is chaotic. Because you got to post every day, at least once a day. It's like, how am I going to think of, it's not impossible, but it's slightly chaotic. Whereas your approach, like, I'm going to write a blog post, record a YouTube video, potentially a podcast about a topic this week. It just sounds a lot more organized and pleasant, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And funny enough, I just, told my wife yesterday, I'm like, if I compare, social media to everything else we are doing, one is very, very hectic. It's like you're in a war zone, constantly responding and adjusting and whatnot. And with the blog, I take my time, I write, if I don't get finished, I continue tomorrow, and I put it out, and it's there. There is no immediate influx, nasty comments and stuff that you might get, or sometimes positive ones too, on social media. And that's very much in line with, how I see my life. I want to actually work less. I want to spend more time with my animals, just watching the chickens do what they do, or holding a rabbit, instead of being constantly doing something, reducing noise. And social media for me is very much noise that I'd like to, get under better control, be there. Yes. Have my regular posts and stuff. But that's it,
Yeah.
and
It's holding a rabbit. That does sound nice.
Same thing. I want to hold a rabbit.
I said the stupidest thing one time, and I'm going to keep just, one time I said there was a huge lottery here in Canada where I live, and it's not like Powerball, but it's like big for Canada. I can't remember what it was, 70 million or something like that. And I said, if I win the 70 million, the first thing I'm going to do is delete Instagram. How sad is that? Anyway, it sounds really nice. I think you're making a really nice case, and we've had other people on. I mean, Jordan Side, who's a big name in the health and fitness industry. He's got a huge following on pretty much every social platform. He's like, write on your blog, make some YouTube videos. He's like, I don't care if I have followers on social media. I don't care if I lose half of them by saying that. This does sound like a really nice organized way to do it. I have a specific question about this person, this blog editor person.
Yes.
So like he's paying attention to the insights and saying, hey, what, this blog post from 2 years ago, you could use a little boost. It's kind of dropped off. Is this a full-time employee for you?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I I wish he was, because he's really, really good at what he does. But no, I think he works about 16 hours a week for me.
Oh, wow. That just sounds like a really valuable person to have on the team, because that's where you kind of lost me at the beginning. It's like, how am I supposed to remember the blog post I wrote 5 years ago if it needs an update? I wouldn't be paying attention to that. But like, he's kind of watching all the data and sort of bringing you up to speed on what maybe needs to be improved. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So did you say it took you 3 years to get to 10,000 subscribers or whatever monthly on your
monthly readers, or unique visitors per month,
right? So I kind of want to again hold people to the notion that in order for you to get to 10,000, first you need one, and in order to have one, you have to have written something, and you got to start getting that stuff out there. And don't make it doesn't have to be perfection, but it has to be you, and it has to be on point. Right? It has to be the best thing you can put out, what you're capable of in that moment, and this point in time in your career. Things can always go back and be edited and redone and republished and all of that stuff, but make it good. And to your point, as specific as possible, that is uniquely relevant to your target audience. Eventually they will find you. Do you find after that 3-year mark that things tended to snowball? Or was it like another 3 years to get to 6?
No, from that point, it was actually, I doubled my visitor account like every year almost.
Yeah. So you got to get like over that hump, and so your wife then said, hey, I think we should consider not making you so reliable on Google in case something happens to Google or something changes or whatever.
Like
so
AI, maybe that's also one thing we should talk about real quick.
Yes. Oh, well, you know what? Because I was going to talk about leading into like a product and how you went about doing that, but let's touch on that a little bit and your thoughts on AI.
Yeah. I mean, back a couple of years ago, there was something called spinning. There were like programs that would take existing content and just replace words to make it sound differently, but it was, practically the same article. But you could rank for that. So what people did is, they had like, let's say, a mattress review, or, a site that reviews mattresses, and they would spin the same article on different sites, multiple times, and they would, rank very well, and they would make a lot of affiliate money with just spun content, meaning not original content. It was just, put through a machine or a software that would replace words and make it sound differently while retaining the original meaning, So that was a thing for a while. And Google discovered it, figured it out, and now that doesn't work anymore. But there is still always technology. There's always things that makes it seem like, oh, I just have to push a button and I get content and I can publish it, and then I don't have to do anything. You know, I don't have to test the product. Actually, I don't have to know anything about it. And AI is kind of like this, obviously significantly better or smarter than anything that we had in the past. But we intentionally do not use AI, with the exception for, you know, maybe social media captions or very short statements or something that we can easily verify. Because the thing with AI is it lies sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it comes up with stuff that's absolutely not true. It sounds very true. It sounds very factual, but it's not true. And so unless you really know, you know, what you're talking about, you know, using the AI. And then the other thing is, if you and I were to ask the AI the same query, the result would be very similar. So you're going to lose the uniqueness of that content, you know. And besides that, it's probably just a matter of time before Google figures out how to identify AI generated content. And, you know, it might work for a while and it will not work forever. And there is nothing, you know, you can tell if someone has actually used a product, has hands-on experience, especially if we talk about a product review. You know, there might be other cases where it's less obvious, but very often, and that's one of the things that Google also pays very close attention to, is, do you have first-hand experience with whatever you're talking, with the topic you're talking about, you know? And if there is an indication that, you know, anyone could have written this, you know, then chances are you might not be ranking as well, at least not in the long term. And so I would highly discourage, as enticing as it sounds, to just, you know, say, hey, I write me an article, 2,000 words about, you know, the benefits of a ketogenic diet. I would argue that you will not rank with that content.
Right.
Yeah. No, and I'm sure Aaron is about ready to share a story. I don't know if you're going to talk at all about kind of what you had learned on your little conference about AI, but just a little side note to kind of agree with what you're saying. So I've been writing some presentations because we're doing like some other work here at Primal. And so just to, you know what, when you're having this day and you're just flat, and I'm like, I need help getting started.
Yes.
So I jump in and I type in, it's something about corporate wellness. And it spit out something and I'm like, nope, sounds too generic. Redo, retypes it. Nope, still sounds generic. It says the same thing, just with so many different words. And to your point, there is absolutely nothing unique about it. And the whole reason we're entering this business is because we think we have something unique to offer, right? And you have to have your voice in there. And so, I mean, was there maybe a sentence or two that was pretty well worded? And I have a tendency to be verbose. I have a tendency to use too many words to say things. And so sometimes I'll use it to be more succinct.
Right.
But you're right. Like, I mean, it wrote something that sounded good, but there was nothing unique about it. There was nothing me or Primal Health Coach Institute about it. And so if you are trying to create original, you want to come across as original and unique and something different, I don't think AI is going to help you there.
No, it's great to get, like, you know, an idea, a framework, an outline, or whatever the case might be, or even, you know, specific ideas where I'm like, the other day I was looking about, I don't know what it was, but something I didn't know much about. And then, you know, I asked the AI, and then I went back and read the study to make sure what the AI said was actually correct. I'm like, okay, so something like this I can use, but I would not have an entire article written, you know, by the AI and just publish it as is, because it will likely not work long term.
So, but my understanding too is how you use it and the inputs you give it, you're going to get a different outcome. And I know Aaron can speak to that a little bit. Sorry, Aaron, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I probably won't speak to it because I'm certainly not an expert, but I've just been learning about how to talk to the ChatGPT robots to get them to kind of at least give you better quality output. But I honestly think the best use for it is what you both said, is ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Ideas. Here's a topic I'm really interested in. Give me 10 blog headlines pertinent to this topic, and it'll spit out 10 blog headlines, and you can say, oh, that's a neat one. I'm going to reword it. I'm going to write this article because I don't know, like I want to be an expert. First of all, I actually desire to be an expert in my field of expertise. I really enjoy it. Like, that's the thing. We go back to this, like, we're not punching a time card here. We have to submit certain number of blog posts by XYZ time. We're doing this because we want to.
Yeah.
And we're zeroed in on an area of expertise that we actually love. So we shouldn't be enjoying the process of writing, quite frankly. But for ideation, I think it's good. And then I've been using it I do some paid ads, which is just a horrible writing exercise. I wouldn't encourage anybody to do. There's a certain framework for ads that I just don't have the brain for it. So I'll ask the robots to write me an ad, and it comes up with kind of what ends up being a really crappy first draft, which I could then use to tweak. But yeah, I mean, obviously Google's going to clock this very quickly if it hasn't already. Like, do not rely on it for actually creating content. One time I asked it to write an article about something scientific with citations. Okay, this was just for tests. This is just to test it out with citations, and it did. And I ran it through a plagiarism checker, came out perfectly clean, which I thought was really interesting because I thought it was, aggregating information that was out, but it's actually thinking in some way. So cleared the plagiarism checker, but the citations were not, they didn't exist, or they were links to completely random things, or they didn't support the argument at all. So like, we can't just blindly, I wouldn't use it. I don't trust it yet. It's scary.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So okay, so we're not going to rely on Google. We need to sort of diversify this stuff. You decide on an actual product. And organ-based supplements have been very popular. And a funny story, this was several years ago. I had a similar idea in mind. I had a friend of ours that was a butcher that always had offal available. And I'm like, you know what, we should just put this in a pill, get it freeze dried down. I wasn't even aware that these things existed. He's like, that's a great idea. So we started that process. And then again, because I Google something, now all these ads for all these organ pills, I'm like, like 85, actually it wasn't that many. I think maybe I saw 2 or 3 products that already existed. And I'm like, all right, I don't have the bandwidth for this on top of my children and my home and my job. So I'm going to bag it, but you ran with it, which I love. What's that process like? Building like an actual product and selling it. Yeah.
Fun, because I had no experience with supply chain or sourcing or any of that. So it was an interesting ride. I think the most difficult part was finding the ingredients and finding manufacturing partners that can produce to your specifications. There are a ton of, if you just Google for supplements, manufacturing, there are endless options. But most of them have like their standard products that they don't know anything about organs in particular, of course, and they just source whatever cheap thing they find. Sometimes they have it in stock, like a stock product, but it's not super high quality, and but really finding someone. I mean, the information, funny enough, for a while, I'm like, okay, I'm protecting, the manufacturing or the information about who I'm using and where I'm sourcing it from, because it took me forever to find it. It's almost was like, my trade secret, even though it's public information. And then later only I found out, like, if 1.5 years in or so, that all the other like bigger ones, like, Ancestor, Heart and Soil, they're sourced from the same, they get it from the same, freeze dryers in New Zealand. I'm like, okay, if someone would have told me this from the beginning, I would have saved a lot of time trying to find that information. And but yeah, that was the most challenging part, to kind of navigate that, and then figure out what you can and cannot say. And funny enough, you can make funky claims about vaccines, but you cannot say that consuming organs is good for your health. I mean, there are certain things you can say and cannot say, right, based on FDA labeling laws, and I think those are ridiculous for the most part. But yeah, I mean, that was, but also, to be quite honest, I didn't start from scratch with the supplement. I already had blog posts that reviewed the most or the best beef organ supplements on the market, and that was those were some of my best ranking articles. So I only had to plug in my product, mentioning that it's mine, of course, not to try to deceive anyone, but I just had to plug them in. And that's how I started, making money with the supplements without having to spend any ad dollar. So that was really fortunate because of my blog. Didn't I have the blog, would have been a completely different story, I think.
What a great nuance to bring forward on that. So you have is it beef liver? Do you have like a line of organ supplements? What is your best seller, and how do you, is it only sold on your website and through your blog and stuff, or is it available through Amazon? Do you have like I don't know, distributor thing?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, it's on our own store, and there are a couple of like individual like health outlets that have it in their practice. Like there is one in Hawaii, funny enough.
Okay.
And in some other places where they offer it to their patients or clients. And so we have that. It's not, we don't have a huge wholesale kind of distribution. Most of the revenue is certainly coming from Amazon as well as from our site directly. And beef liver was the first product because it's the least expensive one. It has the highest demand. Everyone knows liver, and a lot of people in comparison consume liver, and compared to maybe kidney or pancreas or what have you. And so that's our best seller still. We also have a heart and spleen, a bone and marrow, and just a few weeks ago we launched a beef organ complex that has 5 organs in the same ratios as the organ size in the animal. So it's a lot of liver, a little bit less heart, a little bit less kidneys, a little bit less spleen, a little bit less pancreas. To kind of mimic, if you really want to do a true nose to tail eating, you would not be eating the same amount of liver as the same amount of heart. If you have to share among your tribe, you get a piece based on the size of the organ. And so that's kind of our unique selling point, because there are different organ supplements on the market, but we are the only beef organ supplement that actually has those ratios, or that adhere to those ratios.
That's so cool.
That is cool.
Like the ancestral ratios.
That's right.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, who do you find is buying organ supplements? Is it all the biohacker guys, or is Gen Pop cluing into it now?
It's actually a different people from all walks of life, different ages. There are some elderly that can barely send an email, but they've realized that they need to be consuming organs because they might be deficient in certain nutrients. I mean, at the end of the day, organs are nothing more than a source of micronutrients, minerals, vitamins, peptides, coenzymes, etc. There's nothing magical about it. It's just trying to bridge the gaps of our modern food supply that's not as nutritious anymore for reasons we can talk hours about. But it's really athletes, biohackers, obviously, animal-based people, carnivores, people who follow a keto diet, but also again elderly people who just want to stay vital and as healthy for as long as they can.
Yeah. So my question was going to be in terms of just from a marketing perspective relative to other supplements. I have to imagine part of the argument might be bioavailability and how much of the actual nutrients your body absorbs compared to other sources of supplements. So I would love for you to speak to that a little bit, because there's always the naysayers out there that are just like it's just an expensive vitamin. But I have to imagine that there's a legitimate rationale to this, because more and more people are cluing into it. And then also my next question is something like that organ complex basically like a replacement for a multivitamin? Is there an argument for maybe buying something specific in terms of pancreas, or something specific to treat a particular deficiency or symptoms? I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think regular synthetic multivitamins are a waste of money. If you've ever taken them and you go to the bathroom and you see a urine turn bright yellow, that's all the B vitamins getting just flushed out. If you consume liver, or any organ for that matter, that's very, very high in B vitamins, you never see a urine turn yellow. That by itself gives you an indication of how much your body absorbs from the stuff you're consuming. And I don't really consider our products to be supplements. They're really whole foods for people who don't like the taste or texture or have issues sourcing organs. Ideally, you eat those organs fresh.
Yeah.
Best case scenario. It's just unfortunately difficult. And so it's just a more convenient way of getting those particular foods, into your diet. And again, there is nothing magic about it. If your diet is dialed in and you're healthy and everything, you might not need them, but if you're lacking on certain micronutrients, and unfortunately, sometimes it's very difficult to figure out if you are, like with calcium, for example, you will never find out by doing a blood test if you're deficient in calcium, because your body is so good at maintaining stable levels, because those are critical to your survival, that it leaches calcium from your bones. You might indirectly find out by, poor bone density over time, that you're calcium deficient. And the same goes with many other micronutrients. So I consume organs just to make sure I get everything I need. If I get some more, it's not going to hurt. I've never heard about vitamin toxicity from real food. You can get that from synthetic vitamins, but sometimes people are afraid of even eating too much liver because of vitamin A. I don't think the Liver King has ever had vitamin A toxicity, so I've never heard any real cases. So it's just expensive. It's a relative argument. I mean,
Right.
if you eat fresh, liver is typically one of the least expensive foods in comparison to muscle meat, and even if you buy freeze-dried supplements, you spend maybe somewhere between 90 cents to $1.30 a day, on making sure you're getting all the micronutrients that you need, that you might not get from your diet. I think it's reasonable in the grander scheme of things. And as far as the marketing is concerned, I mean, the truth is, I mentioned it before, all of the premium brands use the same raw ingredients. They come from New Zealand. Waitaki Bioscience is one of the largest freeze dryers over there. That's where we all get it from. So the difference really is, I think the brand that, and the people standing behind the brand. Like a lot of people, like our family-based approach, some people really like, the Liver King's approach. Many people now don't like that so much anymore.
Right.
So it really it depends on the brand, or on the people behind the brand, and what message you portray, what values you have, and then particularly in our case, our key differentiator really is that we put 45 servings in a bottle versus 30. That means less money for us, but I really believe that the more people consume organs, because you could make an argument, are people unhealthy because of what they eat or what they don't eat? And I think there are, those two are equally important, but getting the nutrients that you might be missing into your diet is the lower hanging fruit for many. That doesn't mean you should stop there, but at least everything else being equal, if your body has all the nutrient it needs, you might have an easier time, dealing with stress and fixing your diet and being, stronger will to make some of the other changes that are necessary to obtain optimal health. And so that's kind of our approach, and it seems to be resonating.
I love that point of view. That's a really nice point of view. It's such a generative point of view in terms of like, what can you consume? What can you eat? What can you do?
Right.
Optimize health, rather than what should you avoid? It's that sort
Right.
of rich language I think is really useful. And to your point, I mean, these are literally freeze-dried organs. I mean, the food matrix is still intact. It's just shrunken. So it's not like you're getting these therapeutic doses of one thing or another. It's all pretty balanced. It's the way it would be if we could eat that stuff. So do you have an affiliate program for your supplement line?
Yes, we do.
Amazing. Cool. Okay, because some coaches listening might be interested in, might be vibing with your point of view on that. Maybe they want to sign up.
That's right.
I feel like we ran out of time to talk about regenerative agriculture. Maybe we'll wait for that one to grow a little, and then we'll bring you back, because I'm very interested in this homesteading, because I have a little homestead here that I live on, and once I have more time, when I'm not spending my whole life on social media, I'm going to get some bees and some pigs and some chickens too. Maybe build a dome over top just in case things get really weird. You know what I mean? Like be fully but why don't you start filling us in on where folks can find you, whether they want to track down some supplements or just learn from how you're creating content, watch and learn. Let us know where they can find you.
Yeah, so michaelkummer.com is the blog. Shop.michaelkummer.com, very easy is our shop. You can also find us on Amazon, MK Supplements, MK as in Michael Kummer. Very creative, speaking about finding a company name or looking for a brand name. But then the podcast, is the Primal Shift podcast. So we intentionally tried to do something different here by bringing our ancestral wisdom, and combining it kind of with the modern world. And that's what the podcast is all about, to talk about how you can do this, how you can, bring back some of those, things that humans and our ancestors have been doing for millions of years, and make it work in a modern world. So primalshiftpodcast.com is where you can find that. And then, on Instagram, mkummer82, you can find me there as well.
Awesome. This was so great. And Aaron's right. We'll have to have you back to talk about the homesteading and stuff. That'd be really cool to see the progress you made. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.